If you put squash in your buns, not only are they packed with nutrition and fiber, but they are loaded with deliciousness. Hello, my pot stickers. Pot stickers? Pot thickeners? What the heck should I call you? I guess I don't know. Why don't you leave a comment down below and tell me what you prefer? I'm Greg, and this is the Pot Thickens, where I share my love of cooking and the cultures behind it. Ever since I posted my vegan lentil and oat burger recipe on YouTube, people have been asking me to share my recipe for the squash buns that I showed in that video. And that's what I'm going to do today. Not only that, but if you stick around until the end of the video, I'm going to share with you a few other amazing things that you can do with this really versatile squash dough recipe. This recipe makes 6 good size hamburger buns, and you can scale this recipe up or down depending on how many buns that you need. The recipe, of course, starts with butternut squash, but actually you could use any kind of pumpkin or squash that you want. I prefer roasted squash because you get that nice sort of sweet caramelized flavor in the squash, but you could easily cube up your squash and boil it or steam it and cook it that way. It doesn't really matter how you cook it, as long as it's cooked and soft so that you can mash it into a puree. If you don't have fresh squash available, then you can always use a can of pumpkin puree as well. You want 200 grams of cooked squash. Mix in a tablespoon or about 8 grams of yeast, along with a little bit of sugar in order to get that yeast started to grow. And add to that 120 milliliters of water. You want to mash the squash up pretty good to make a puree of this. It doesn't really have to be too fine, as long as it's smashed up pretty good. Set this aside and let that yeast hydrate in the squash mixture while you prepare your dry ingredients. I'm using a stand mixer today to knead the dough, but you can knead it by hand. But what you want to do is have 400 grams of flour. You could use all-purpose flour or bread flour, either works, so don't make a special trip to the store, just use what you have on hand. To the flour, I'm adding 8 grams of salt, so my salt to flour ratio is about 2% salt. Add the squash mixture to your dry ingredients, put this on your stand mixer, and knead it for about 10 minutes. This will make a soft and sticky dough. If it's too dry, add a tablespoon of water a little at a time until it has the right consistency. Or if it's too wet, you can always add a little bit of flour until it's just the right consistency. Do this before you knead it all completely. Cover the dough and let it proof for 1 to 2 hours depending on your temperature until the dough has at least doubled in size. Once that first rise is done, transfer the dough to a floured surface. It'll be a sticky dough, so use as much flour as you need just to keep it from sticking to the board and from your hands. Try not to go overboard with the flour here. You want to press the air out of the dough and then divide it into 6 equally sized pieces. Roll each of these into a tight ball, gently stretching the surface to create a taut skin. Place these on a lightly floured baking sheet. I like to use parchment paper on my baking sheet, but I also sprinkle a little bit of flour just so it doesn't stick. Cover your dough balls and let them rise for about 15 to 30 minutes until they puff up almost double in size. You want to preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. When the buns are ready for baking, I like to gently press them down with a light touch just to slightly flatten them out into more of a bun shape. They will rise up in the oven, so I don't want them to be too tall after they're completely cooked. Be careful not to deflate them. You want to keep all that air inside that you've developed in this second rise. I'm brushing on top a little bit of maple syrup that has been diluted with a small amount of plant-based milk. I used almond milk. This does 2 things. It helps to brown the top of the bun when it's baking in the oven, so you get that nice golden sort of crust on the top. And it also helps to stick on the sesame seeds that I want to garnish these buns with so they don't fall off after it's baked. Pop these into your hot oven and bake it for 15 to 20 minutes. Check them near the end of baking to make sure they don't get too brown. You don't want them to get too hard and dry. If your oven doesn't heat evenly, go ahead and turn that baking sheet around about halfway through the cooking to help evenly cook the buns. Once they're done, take them out, let them cool, and store them in a covered container or in a plastic bag. As they cool, the outer crust will soften and you'll have a delicious, moist, and soft bun for your favorite burger recipe. Okay, as promised, I want to share with you a few other things you can do with this recipe. So once you make this dough and you let it rise the first time, you can do a lot of different things with it. One of them is to make dinner rolls. So just like making the hamburger buns, if you just roll out those buns and put them into a baking dish that has a little bit higher sides and crowd them a little bit closer together, they will bake in the oven more like a dinner roll, and they'll be soft and moist and they won't have a crust all the way around them. You could also shape this dough into more of a baguette shape and make an individual sandwich style baguette, and you could slash that and bake it in a 400-degree oven until it gets a nice crispness on the top. The inspiration for this recipe actually came from the Chinese style steamed buns, and so you can certainly take this dough and steam it, make that soft, moist Chinese style bao buns. You want to roll out the dough into a flat rectangle and then roll it up into a cylinder. Again, this is right after you have done the first rising. Slice that into 1-inch slices. I like to place them on pieces of parchment paper. Cover those and let them rise again for about 15 to 30 minutes until they almost double in size. Place this in a steamer and steam it for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, don't open it, just turn the heat off and let it sit for another 5 minutes. And then you're gonna have the most delicious, soft, moist, steamed buns you've ever had in your life. If you think this video is helpful, please smash that like button and let YouTube know. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another great plant-based recipe on The Pot Thickens.